Welcome everybody. Hope you are enjoying this, I was going to say nice spring weather, but it's a little chilly in Nashville today. Nevertheless, my allergies have gotten the best of me. So happy April Fool's Day. We don't want you to get fooled in this information age. We've got some really great stuff to present to you. And in some ways, there's some foundational things that in some ways are more important than anything we've ever really shared in an online presentation like this. We're going to do a really deep dive into the investor psyche and hopefully come away with some answers to help us prevent fear from knocking us off track from having financial success. So let's get started here. If you've got questions as we're presenting anything here, feel free to type them in either at the top or at the bottom of your screen. There's a Q&A button, and you can type any questions there, and we'll answer those either throughout or at the end of the presentation. But you know, I've had this particular idea for a presentation for quite a while, but I wasn't exactly sure how to present the information that we're going to talk about. But then, a few months ago, I watched The Social Dilemma, which I loved. My kids were not real happy that I watched it. And if you've seen it, you know why, because I have a 15-year-old, my oldest. So, but it really helped a lot of things come together in my mind. If you haven't watched it, please do so soon. I think it'll help you in multiple ways. Probably even help you financially. It's not really related to finance, but it's related to how our brains take in information. And I love this quote: if you're not paying for the product, then you're not the consumer. You're the product being sold. Let that sink in for a minute. Who pays for us to have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter? I mean, they're basically free, right? We don't pay for Google. I use it every day, probably. So who's paying for it? What are they after? You know, in the information age, these are questions that I think we have to ask. Yeah, this problem is really nothing new. You know, the advent of television broadcasting back in the 1950s began to really change people's lives in this country forever. I remember growing up as a kid, my mom produced the 6 o'clock news at the NBC station in Knoxville. You know, she always had a passion for the truth. That's why she got into journalism. And many good journalists still have that today. Yet when you take a step back and you look at the big picture, you realize these companies have to make money too. I remember being, I don't know, maybe 10 years old, and I go with my mom to work one day, and I'm thinking, I asked her, I said, who's driving these BMWs that are parked in the reserve spots out in front of the WBIR news station? She said, oh, those are reserved for salespeople. And even as a young kid, I was wondering, what do you sell at a news station? You know, I thought it was just some like public service, right? But I assure you of this, if no one watches the news, no one in that business is going to make any money. So the unfortunate truth is that this big machine in the information age, whether it's TV, online, you know, this big machine has to be fed. And right or wrong, our attention is the only thing it runs on. And these days, it's even bigger, right? We carry around in our pockets little devices that contain information about not only almost everything going on in the world right now, but almost everything that has ever happened in the world. It can be overwhelming. I'm not exactly sure we were meant to have this much information as we live life. So on the one hand, it can be great, but on the other hand, it can be very difficult. You know, sometimes it can even be, when things get really hard, in multiple ways, it can be depressing, even debilitating. There's a lot of information out there, especially in the financial news world, which we're going to talk most about. Yet, as an supposedly expert in that field, I don't see much practical wisdom from the financial news outlets on TV or the internet. We all know there's obviously a big difference between mindless information that gets you nowhere versus wisdom and principles that you can actually use to help you have and maintain financial success. Yet, this is, like I said, nothing new. A long time ago, Thomas Jefferson said, "The man who reads nothing at all is better educated than the man who reads only newspapers." I'm not exactly sure what our third president was referring to when he said this, but it lets me know that this problem's been around for a while. And truthfully, we're not going to blame anybody in the news industry today. In some ways, they're just doing their job. And in other ways, they're just a mirror. I mean, they're kind of like Congress, giving us as Americans whatever we think we want. If they didn't do it, then they wouldn't survive financially, and if they didn't do it, somebody else would provide this kind of news. So let's discuss the real problem, but then let's also discuss the real solution. But first, a quick recap on last year, because I think we're early enough into this year where the lessons of the last year are so important. So I'm gonna let Grayson walk us through some recent market activity and help us make sense of all the lessons to make sure we learn everything that recent and longer history is trying to teach us.
Thanks, Michael. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. Like Michael said, we're going to most certainly look at where we're going. Let's look at where we've been and kind of where we are now first. So this is a chart that many of you have seen before. We use this chart a lot in our conversations with a lot of you. It's basically got a whole lot of gray bars and a whole lot of red dots. So let's dissect this a little bit. The gray bars are going to be indicative of the S&P 500 and what it's returned each year going back to 1980. However, the red dots are going to be indicative of the inter-year declines within those specific years. We talked a lot about 1987 over the last couple of years with a lot of our clients. 1987 is circled on the left of your screen. If you notice, the gray bar is 2%. So the actual S&P earned 2% that year. But during the year, it actually went down 34%. So it was a very steep downturn, but also a very quick and steep recovery. Why was that? Well, we're going to dive into that here in just a couple of minutes. But we talked about that event was going to be something that was going to be coming for investors 2019, 2020, 2021. Obviously, we had no idea what COVID-19 was, but we saw an inter-year 34% decline last year. However, the market returned 16% last year, which is very good. So let's dive into why we feel like that actually occurred. So this chart as well is indicative of a chart that we've showed a lot of you guys on a pretty consistent basis as well. One of the quotes that we like to harp on a lot is actually a quote by Mark Twain. Mark Twain said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. This is a chart going back to 1926 of the large cap stock market, okay? If you look at it, it seems to be repeating a pattern, okay? The red circles are going to be indicative of long-term bad or bear markets within the stock market. Those last about 8 to 10 years. The green lines are going to be indicative of long-term positive cycles in the market or bull markets, which last about 25 years. However, if you look at the two green arrows to the left and middle of your screen, those are about double as long as the one on the right, meaning we felt like we were only about halfway through the next positive cycle. And so because of that, downturns historically in the market during positive cycles, long-term positive cycles, have been very quick and swift, and that was indicative of what happened late last year as well. So it's very important to remember. This is also a great chart that we love to talk about moving forward. There's nothing special about the portfolios here seen on your screen. They're properly diversified mutual funds ranging from very, very conservative to, I would say, more growth oriented. I a lot of times don't like to use the word aggressive because if we're properly allocated in a good time horizon, we're never too aggressive or too conservative. Two things to point out though in this chart is that regardless of how a portfolio has been allocated, and again, these are properly allocated, each of these portfolios reached a new all-time high in each decade on record. So this started in the 1930s all the way through till 12 of 2019. In each decade on record, each of these portfolios returned an all-time high. However, also of note, the most conservative income portfolio, illustrated by the gray line, and then the aggressive growth portfolio, illustrated by the orange line, the difference there is about 17 times. So we'll harp on that here in just a second as well, but that's something to be mindful of as we continue to be good investors to be able to withstand volatility over time. So going back to the last slide, another question that we talk about, or another comment that we make a lot in our practice, is it's difficult to be a good investor, but it's easy to pick good investments. Okay, so what does that mean? I did a little bit of digging and research, and in 2018, Michael, you can go to the next slide. In 2018, just in America alone, there were over 8,000 mutual funds, okay? In the world today, there are over 100,000 mutual funds. So going back to that comment, it's easy to pick good investments. It's hard to be a good investor. Statistics would say that based on that amount of investment options at a client or an advisor's disposal, in some ways, advisors can back in, or even clients can back into good investments. That's not the difficulty. But you'll see in this chart, the average investor, illustrated by the orange bar, not only lags the stock market in returns over the last 20 years, but also lags the bond market as well. And that's something that pains Michael, myself, Caroline, and Kathy on our team. That's why we get up and go to work every day, because we don't want our clients to be average investors. We want our clients to be in the 90th, 95th plus percentile in returns over time. But it takes some of the things that we're going to talk about today to really get to that place. Now, we didn't think that we'd get out of here without a little bit of a political note. Last year was a pretty tumultuous year as well in regards to politics. I'm not going to dive deep into politics, but I do want to point out a couple of things on this chart, okay? You'll notice that when a Republican, let's call it George Bush, when George Bush was in office, Republicans felt better about the economy than the Democrats. And that switched during the Obama years, switched back during the Trump years. And we could go back long before that normally, depending on the political party in the White House and in Congress, if you align with that party, more than likely you feel good or better about the economy than the opposite political party does. However, what we've seen, if you remember the charts a couple ago, the one recurring theme over time is that the charts and the S&P 500 and the overall stock market returns have gone up and to the right. So we would say that the market does not care who's in the White House, does not care who's in Congress. Historically, what has happened is the stock market's earned about 10 to 11%. So bottom line, as far as our political views go, is we feel like, historically speaking, it has never been a good idea to ever mix your political ideology and your investment decisions. It's just never paid off, and history has shown us that. And I also wanted to touch a little bit on the pandemic. What this shows is, again, the daily new cases over time. And as we've seen, we've most certainly been moving in the right direction. And you can think about this as kind of a glass half full or a glass half empty approach. I think to be where we are now, based where we were a year ago, might be one of the most uncanny, most heroic things that our world has ever seen. But thinking about it too, glass half full, we lost a lot of people. But when we look at, some of the other pandemics that occurred about a century ago, those lost about 1 in every 200 individuals within this country. And obviously, the book is not closed on COVID-19, but the statistics have shown that we're trending in a much more positive statistical way than that. And so we feel good about where COVID-19 is, and as it relates to the stock market and as it relates to our clients' portfolios.
Thank you, Grayson. So back to what I call the financial dilemma and the main point of what we want to talk about today. You know, in a lot of these presentations, we'll list some concerns that we think you might have about what's going on with the market or the economy or the world today. And then we'll present some information that would be comforting in some way in an effort to help you have faith in your financial plan and kind of keep moving towards the goals that you have. We typically present information that essentially would show how your financial plan or portfolio is really already prepared for the things that you're concerned about. After all, we're financial planners. And so if there's something out there that, you know, if you're a client of ours and there's something out there that we haven't planned for, then, you know, we're not doing our job. But today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're actually going to question where the concerns and worries we might sometimes have come from in the first place. We're going to question how and why we sometimes let them get us so fearful that we are tempted to abandon the perfect financial plan we already have in place. You know, I started reading a book not too long ago by an author named Jordan Peterson, and he said something that really caught my attention. He said, we often get significant psychological and societal questions backwards. And then I thought, now, where have I heard this before? And I realized that it's actually something that I had seen on TV. So let's take a listen here.
George, you know, that woman just looked at you.
So what? What am I supposed to do?
Go talk to her.
Elaine, bald men with no jobs and no money who live with their parents don't approach strange women.
Well, here's your chance to try the opposite. Instead of tuna salad and being intimidated by women, chicken salad and going right up to them.
Yeah, I should do the opposite. I should.
If every instinct you have is wrong, then the opposite would have to be right.
Yes, I will do the opposite. I used to sit here and do nothing and regret it for the rest of the day. So now I will do the opposite and I will do something. Excuse me, I couldn't help but notice that you were looking in my direction.
Oh, yes, I was. You just ordered the same exact lunch as me.
My name is George. I'm unemployed and I live with my parents.
I'm Victoria. Hi.
I mean, it just doesn't get any better. I mean, that's just, it's absolutely priceless. You know, that show was so funny because it was so true, right? I mean, that's why that show was so attractive and was so consistently successful for so long. I mean, who doesn't doubt the decisions that they make, you know, on a daily basis? We all have a little bit of George Costanza in them. And sometimes we want to, you know, just go do the exact opposite. And that's not always the right answer either. But I just think, I think when it's easy when it comes especially to financial and investment decision making, especially with all the financial news we're bombarded with on a daily basis, to have doubts and to question ourselves. It's just so easy to do. But let's see if Jerry Seinfeld and George Costanza have some wisdom here for us. So let's play a game. What if we took every concern you've ever had about the markets or your portfolio and we phrased them backwards? Where would that leave us? For example, since we just looked at politics, let's start here. How can the market do well with a Democratic or Republican government? When Trump was elected, people thought the market was going to tank. Some people. When Biden was elected, some people thought the market was going to tank. Well, it really did neither. So the proper way to ask the question would be exactly backwards. How could one political party ever keep the market from doing well over the long run? Here's another one. How can the equity markets, the stock market, keep going up with all the money the government is printing? I had lunch the other day with a dear friend and a mentor that he said, well, Michael, I'm just waiting for the bottom to drop out of the market. And I totally understand where he's coming from. His comment was really intelligent. He's like, well, with all the government's doing, we got to pay for it at some point. If we phrase the question backwards, we would say, how can the stock and equity markets not go up with all the money the government is printing? Because here's the reality. If you've tuned in to any of our presentations in the last couple of years, you know a couple things. One, the government has never stopped printing money. And second, inflation, which is what that is, actually can cause the equity markets to go up even more because corporations can build cost increases into their product sales. And inflation means people are making more money anyway, so they can afford those higher prices. Creating inflation is technically a strategy from the US government playbook that goes all the way back to World War II and even prior to that. But of course, if you've been paying attention to what we've been saying, you know that already. Here's another one. How can I protect myself from volatility by using only conservative investments that are not going to go up and down a lot? Well, instead, what if we said, how can I hurt myself by using only conservative investments that are not volatile? We just looked at a slide a minute ago that showed conservative investments by themselves do not earn enough in our capitalistic inflationary economy. In fact, something worse happens. Inflation comes and tackles you from behind, as Dave Ramsey would say. And I have some really bad news. When inflation comes and tackles you from behind, you can never get caught, or you can never break free. The game is essentially near over by that point, because inflation's not going to stop going up, causing expenses to go up. And once you get caught, you just can't be free. Here's the most popular one, most likely that we hear. What if the market crashes and I can't retire, or I can't stay retired? Or if we're in the middle of a market downturn, we might ask how we can stop the bleeding so we can at least prevent further principal loss. Since this is really often the most crucial question, let's make sure we get this right so we can see how we can ask this one differently as well. The right way to ask it, I think, is when has the market, the stock market, ever caused a person's financial plan to be derailed? Let me explain. For those of you who have heard a friend or family member say that they lost all or a lot of their money in the market or had some terrible investing experience, I promise you this. If the market is at or near an all-time high right now, we use the Dow, we use the Standard & Poor's. The Dow is a measure of 30 companies, as we'll talk about here in a minute. The Standard & Poor's 500 index is a measure of the largest 500 companies in the U.S. It crossed 4,000 for the first time ever today. Good timing. But if the market is at or near an all-time high right now, then it's mathematically impossible for the market to be what caused these people's investment and financial woes. Let me say it this way. If the airplane I was on the other day coming back from Florida arrived safely in Nashville after some turbulence, but if I didn't arrive safely at the gate in Nashville, there's only one of two possible explanations. Either I didn't get on the flight or I got off the plane too early. That's not a good idea. As Dave Ramsey says, there's only one good time to get off the roller coaster, and that's at the end. So the financial truth here is this. In the sad story of investors who experience permanent investment loss, it's always and only one of two things, either lack of patience or lack of proper diversification. Lack of patience means you got out of the portfolio too early. Lack of diversification means you are on the wrong flight to begin with. That portfolio was never going to get you where you wanted to go. So patience and diversification. The wonderful news is that those two things you actually have practically full control over, which is a really wonderful thing. As a general rule, it's always great to ask questions about things we can control And it's almost always pointless and completely irrelevant to ask questions about things we cannot control. So back to broadcasting. You literally have to practice something I might call like wise ignorant when you're looking at financial news. Wise about things that matter and ignorant about the things that don't. You can use wisdom to your advantage as you seek to make smart financial decisions. But wisdom comes over time through experience, as well as the study of the time that came before us. Those are the lessons history, I think, is dying to teach us. Then everything else you can ignore. Because as Dave Ramsey said, you really want to walk to the beat of a different drummer. That's the same beat that the wealthy hear. Most of you on this call are already wealthy. But if the beat sounds too normal, evacuate the dance floor immediately, he says. The goal is to not be normal, because as my radio listeners know, normal is broke. What Grayson mentioned on the slide from just a minute ago is that normal in the investment world is a really poor investor return. And that's not good. What gives us great passion is that even wealthy people, as we've seen, can make big investing mistakes. And because they have more money, each mistake costs them a lot more than the average person. So this happens because there's just a lot of noise out there that gets in your way. Just listen to what some folks in the financial news media have said about their very own programming. The market has a pulse and an emotion. You see it move, it's real. That was from a lady named Susan Krakauer. She used to work at CNBC. Before she was a CNBC producer, she produced The Jerry Springer Show, Sally Jesse Raphael, and The Maury Povich Show, if that tells you anything. Here's another one. We're always looking for qualitative combat on the air. Most of these conversations live somewhere between fear on one end and greed on the other. Now, that one's from Mark Hoffman. He's essentially head of CNBC right now. I mean, I'll give them a little bit of credit, both of them. At least they're being honest. These are the people who get paid millions of dollars to choose what gets put on air for the top financial news channel in the world. Do you think your news outlet of choice is any different? And is this what you want for your financial plan? I'll ask very frankly. A lot of emotion that changes every day, a lot of fear and greed? Not for me. No, thank you. I'll take more financial confidence. We wonder where this stuff comes from. It's coming right at you every day. Guys, in case you ever want to doubt the stock market again, here is probably the most helpful exercise, okay? The Dow is 30 companies, essentially. It's a benchmark, it's an index that we use, right? Just find the level of the Dow, maybe on your birthday. Or if you want to use this exercise, just get pretty close. You can look it up very easily, okay? Let's say if you're 100 years old, the Dow on your birthday was at 76. 80 years ago, it was at 122. 60 years ago, it was at 648. Now it's above 32,000. You know, here's the interesting thing. It's actually above 33,000. It's gone up a lot, but this increase doesn't even include dividends. 100 years ago, $76 would not be worth 32,000 now. It'd be worth over $1 million if you include dividends. And it's impossible, I think, to invest in dividend stocks and somehow not get the dividend. So I just think this exercise is even amazing to me to kind of see the power of what has happened in the Dow. Yet some will say, sure, that's great, Michael, that it's grown so much, but I'm still afraid it's going to all come crashing down. I'm still afraid somehow my financial plan is not going to work, or I doubt it sometimes, and I'd like to not have those doubts, or I don't have enough time, I don't have another 100 years, or somehow it seems all good to be true. I totally understand. All of those concerns, the concern I mentioned that came from a friend and mentor the other day too, about waiting for the market, the bottom to fall out. I'm just not sure that those fears and thoughts came from you when you have those. I think they come from parents. I think they come from our upbringing. They come from friends and family members now that whoever we talk to about money, it's just human nature that we're influenced by other people, and especially in the financial news media. Everything on the last slide is absolute fact. And every one of you is way too smart to ignore those facts. That's why I know that some of the concerns you have sometimes did not exactly originate from you. But in the end, I'm not sure it really matters if you can't find out how the negative thoughts about investing originated. We're complex human beings, and our thoughts about money obviously come from people around us. But what matters, though, is what you do with it. That's your choice. Here's one recommendation. Once and for all, we need to truly understand why the Dow has done what it's done. The Dow, as I said, is simply a group of 30 companies we use to measure the general performance of large cap America, as we call it. Here was the Dow almost 50 years ago. Let's take a moment to look at some of the names on this list. Exxon, Procter & Gamble, AT&T, certainly some household names here. But what about Kodak, Sears, Chrysler? Those are all companies most of us know as well. But let's take a look and see what's happened to them now. This is the current list of the companies in the Dow Jones Industrial Index. I don't see Kodak. I don't see Sears. I don't see Chrysler. Let me ask you this. When's the last time you took a Polaroid picture? What do you take pictures with now? Let me guess. It's not only a camera, is it? And it's probably in your pocket or your purse most of the time. Just take a step back and think about your own life experience and forget everyone's opinion for a moment, especially mine. And then take a look at this list of current companies in the Dow today. No Chrysler, no Kodak, no Sears. There's also no Woolworth, which was on the former list, International Paper, no General Motors. Guys, a lot of these companies are still around, but they are a fraction of the giants they used to be. What's happened is they've been replaced by newer companies that started and entered new industries and developed new ideas. These are the new products and services we use more often now than the old ones because they're just better than what we had before. Have you ever thought about this? Where was Apple, Microsoft, and IBM 50 years ago? If that's too long, how about Salesforce and Cisco on this list? Where were they 20 years ago? This is capitalism and competition at its best because all of these companies are competing for your dollars, just like the news media. Except these are companies you get to own. And there are news media companies you get to own as well. Historically speaking, being an owner of a diversified portfolio has paid off over the long run. Because the fine people at these fine companies and others, they work for you. You probably don't feel like a powerful owner of a giant corporation, but if your portfolio is allocated the right way, you are. And these people who run these companies, they're essentially your employees, and they have to earn a living to put food on the table. Why in the world do we think people will ever stop trying to put food on the table? They don't, and they won't. And that's why the Dow has historically moved upwards over the long term. It's that simple. You know, of the 30 companies in the current Dow, only 3 were there 50 years ago. That means literally 90% of today's stock market hardly existed or did not exist at all 50 years ago. Let that sink in for a moment. Innovation happens, change happens. Industries and societies evolve, and therefore so does the Dow. It's a force that literally cannot be stopped. And thank goodness, because you do not want to see what an investment in the Dow from 50 years ago is right now. I'll say that again. The Dow from 50 years ago, you do not want to be invested in those companies today. You would not have wanted to be invested in only those companies for the last 50 years. You'd have a lot less money than you probably have right now. Guys, here's the deal. Once you know what's really going on out there, once you really know what's going on out there, you hopefully no longer have to be afraid someone's tricking you. You no longer let blind people lead you, because that happens a lot, the blind leading the blind. Once you know what's really going on in front of you, I think is actually easy to see. Just look around you, use your own experience. People go to work every day, earn a living. They're either trying to progress in their careers or they're just working hard to make ends meet. But either way, most everybody has to work for a living. They won't report this on the news tonight because it's not newsworthy and it won't help them sell commercials. But it's really noteworthy to us. And as George Orwell said, to see what is in front of one's own nose needs a constant struggle. That's the Dow. Well, we've covered a lot here. So let's wrap up with a few closing thoughts. Just remember what we've covered. We already are planning for recessions and depressions if you're a client. You hear us talk about those all the time. They've come before and they'll come again. But once you have those factored into your plan, can you not rest easy? That's when it's time to ask a different question, to ask it backwards. Don't ask how somehow you're doing it wrong. Start asking, how come most people aren't doing it right? Because if you're a client of ours, you're doing it right. You know, sometimes you just have to keep doing what you already know how to do. Dottie Pepper played on the LPGA tour for years. She said, when you're facing intense pressure, she was talking about golf tournaments. I'm talking about investing. I'm really talking about when the markets are down 30, 40%. That's intense pressure. She said, when that happens, sometimes the best thing to do is to just keep doing what you already know how to do. My friend the other day who mentioned the market, he was afraid of, just curious when the market, bottom was going to fall out. He said in that same conversation, he said, well, I just keep doing what I've been doing. It's always worked for me. And I said, yeah, it sure has. You guys, a lot of you have been through volatility a lot. And I'm really proud of you because you've come out on the other side, not just once, but again and again and again. You've had some serious concerns each time. We've discussed them. And at times your thinking has changed. And you've seen how some things that seem to threaten your financial success one day have had little to no effect at all down the road. And that's literally the process of becoming a successful investor. You're doing it. I think what few people will tell you out there is this. All the answers to your most important financial questions are really already inside you. We don't have them. We only have suggestions, and we're always pointing to that courageous, wise part of you that already knows where you need to go in life. You just need some help from someone else to help you get there. We're all wired that way. Just remember that everything on television is presented by something or someone or some company who desperately wants your attention. So just be careful who you give your attention to, because you might not want to do what they say. You might not want to follow their advice. You might not want to think the way they think. As I said a minute ago, if normal is broke in America and the average investor underperforms just the average investment that they can go buy, are we really supposed to assume financial journalists are any different? Do they have it all figured out? It might sound like I'm beating up an entire industry, and I'm really not. But just follow the money and ask yourself how they get paid. How do they get paid to grab your attention? That's all they can do is hold your attention for as long as they can do it. And the more they do, the more money they make. CNBC's ratings are way down when the market's up. When the market's down, CNBC ratings are way up. It's just a fact. But in contrast, you have a financial advisor team who is not free. If you're a client, you're the only one who pays us. we sell you absolutely nothing, and instead we recommend only what's in your best interest, and we get paid only to maximize the chances that your financial goals become true. I'm not saying we're perfect, but you just need to be smart out there and follow the money. The goal here is to be a successful investor. In my experience, I think the only way to go from a typical investor to a successful investor is to honestly bring your concerns and fears about money to someone you trust, who can help you remember that all your problems can be solved through your use of timeless investment principles that have always worked. There's a big difference between believing that we are the solution versus believing that you are the solution, and you know where we stand. Guys, I don't mean to overstate this as we wrap up here, and I don't want to get overly emotional or dramatic about this, but it was just a year ago that we had some very stressful conversations with some of you because the market had dropped by 1/3. And I think about the real cost of investing. Is it fees? I mean, you want to know what fees you're paying, and we're always open and transparent about those with our client. But what I'm really concerned about are those moments coming sooner or later when, again, some of you are going to feel like your entire financial future is in absolute free fall. That's why we do these presentations. You know, it's April Fool's Day. This is no joke. We're preparing for the next recession or depression to make sure you don't get fooled that time. You know, many of us love the Star Wars movies. So many great scenes, so many incredible characters, a lot of episodes, takes a lot of time to watch them. And a plot, though, that practically transcends theater, because the plot is essentially life itself, right? The battle of good versus evil, having and finding a greater purpose, and good or love really winning in the end. So how in the world, if you're the director producer, how in the world do you wrap up a significant movie series like that reveals so much about our very lives and existence? That's what I was wondering as I was watching the final movie. So the scene near the end, when Kylo Ren meets the spirit of his deceased father, Han Solo, one last time. If we've seen it, you know, Kylo Ren has been in the battle of good versus evil for a long, long time, and it's taken a toll on his life. He spent much of his life on the dark side. Yet he's given one last chance to make amends, and in the process, redeem his own life and actually redeem the entire universe. Yet something is still holding him back until he sees his dad. That's what he needed, to see his dad, to have his support, and to receive his encouragement. Aren't we all the same? The way Harrison Ford looks at Adam Driver in this scene literally transcends words. And then Kylo Ren wraps up the whole point of the Star Wars movie series. All the conflict, all the battles, all the wins and losses, the meaning of all the tension between the good guys and the bad guys with this one admission. I know what I need to do, I just don't know if I have the strength to do it. His father tells him he does indeed have the strength, and that's all Kylo needs to hear. Kylo throws his red lightsaber into the abyss, signifying the last and necessary final step before he could destroy evil once and for all. I mean, it just doesn't get any better than that. Here's my point. We know where we need to go in life. We just need help getting there. And that's why we're here. That's why Kathy's here. That's why Caroline's here. That's why Grayson's here. And that's why I'm here. To help you have the courage to succeed financially. You know, the dark side, someone sometimes feels like the good side. And so I want you to remember that as you look at your phone, as you look on the internet, and as you watch TV. It's not my job to judge anybody out there, but not everybody's looking out for your best interest. Because, you know, there's a lot at stake in your life. A lot of your financial goals and dreams will affect your family for a very, very long time, probably long after you're gone. And we think about that every day. We think about what's at stake. And sometimes when things get really hard, it can seem like there are either a million things standing in your way of succeeding financially, or when the market's down a lot, it can feel like there's one big thing, like the market, that's threatening to break your financial plan into a million pieces. But let me assure you, like just about everything else in life, the only thing in your way is you. You're the problem. That's the bad news. Same for me. I'm the problem in my life. But the good news is that you're also the solution in your life. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today. We took a little bit different turn. And for those of you that are clients, I can't tell you how much of a pleasure it is to really partner with you on this journey.